They said the dead stopped changing your life, but they never warned me about her phone lighting up after the burial. Marcus Holloway stood at the edge of Greenwood Memorial Park in Atlanta, his black suit still stiff from the morning service, watching as distant relatives slowly disappeared into cars that smelled like rain and roses. The sky carried that dull southern gray that makes everything feel heavier than it should, and every sound seemed delayed, like the world itself was unsure how to continue. Danielle was gone. At least that was what everyone kept repeating, offering soft condolences as if repetition could make it real. Marcus barely responded, his hands locked around a small paper program from the ceremony that already felt older than memory. People had called her kind, brilliant, irreplaceable, words that sounded too polished for someone who still left coffee mugs on the kitchen counter every morning. Then he noticed him, a man standing near the far edge of the gathering, not speaking to anyone, not offering sympathy, just watching. Dark coat, still posture, eyes fixed on Marcus as if waiting for permission to exist in the same moment. Marcus assumed he was a distant colleague or maybe someone from Danielle's volunteer work, yet something about the stillness felt misplaced, like a pause in a conversation that had already ended. When Marcus finally looked away and returned his attention forward, the man was still there, closer now than before without any memory of movement. The ceremony concluded with the sound of soil being lowered, a sound too ordinary for something irreversible, and Marcus felt an unexpected emptiness rather than tears, as if his grief had been delayed by exhaustion. He drove home alone through Atlanta traffic, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, passing grocery stores, gas stations, and neighborhoods where life continued without interruption. Their house came into view just after sunset, lights still on in the kitchen because he had forgotten to turn them off before leaving that morning. Inside, everything smelled faintly like Danielle's lavender hand lotion, mixed with the coffee she never finished. Marcus placed her belongings carefully on the dining table, unsure why nothing felt final. It was then he saw the phone. Not on the table where he had left it for identification, not in the box from the funeral home, but sitting on the kitchen counter with its screen softly glowing as if it had just been set down seconds ago. A notification pulsed across the display. No service, yet location active. Marcus stepped closer, his breath tightening in a way he could not explain, and the screen shifted again without touch, revealing a map pin he did not recognize, 300 miles away in another state. His first instinct was malfunction, some technical leftover from the network, yet the battery indicator showed full charge, impossible for a device that had been sealed away. Behind him, the house creaked with normal evening settling, but the silence between those sounds felt wrong, stretched too thin. He reached for the phone slowly, expecting it to turn off, but instead a second alert appeared. New file received. The timestamp read after the burial. Marcus did not move for several seconds, only staring as if still waiting for someone to explain what reality he was supposed to accept next, and just before the screen dimmed again, one final line appeared that made his throat tighten without sound. If you were holding this, then you were never meant to believe she was gone. Marcus did not sleep that night, not because of fear in the usual sense, but because his mind refused to accept that a device could behave as if its owner still had influence over it. Before sunrise, he wrapped the phone in a small cloth and drove across Atlanta toward a mobile service center that advertised advanced data recovery on a faded sign above a strip mall. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed with a constant electrical fatigue, and a young technician named Caleb barely looked up before asking for the device. Marcus explained only what was necessary, that it belonged to his late wife, and had begun producing activity that made no sense. Caleb rotated the phone under a magnifier, tapping through diagnostic menus with the calm indifference of someone who had seen every kind of digital malfunction, but his expression changed when the system logs revealed outgoing network requests that bypassed normal carrier routing. There was a pause. Then Caleb asked a question that felt heavier than it should have been. Did she ever use encrypted backup services? Marcus answered honestly that he did not know. Within minutes, Caleb connected the device to a secured terminal and ran a deeper scan, and what appeared on the screen forced the room into a different kind of silence. The phone was not acting alone. It was synchronized with a secondary cloud identity registered under Danielle Holloway, but also under a second profile that had been created 8 months earlier using a different email domain Marcus had never seen. That profile contained synchronized calendar entries, location histories, and audio notes that were still updating in real time. Marcus leaned forward as if proximity could change meaning, and Caleb quietly pointed out that the last sync event had occurred less than 2 hours ago from a location approximately 120 miles north of Atlanta. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, not from grief but from disorientation, because that timestamp overlapped with the moment he had been sitting alone in his living room believing everything had already ended. He left the shop without asking further questions. The phone now returned to his hand, but heavier in purpose than before. Outside, the morning air carried the smell of damp pavement and gasoline, and for the first time, he noticed a missed call notification that had been buried beneath system alerts. The caller ID displayed an unknown number with no region code, only a timestamp that aligned with the moment the phone had first powered itself on. When he returned the call, there was no answer, only a brief automated tone followed by a single incoming text message that arrived instantly afterward. Stop looking at the phone in public. Marcus stopped walking. People passed him on the sidewalk carrying coffee, briefcases, gym bags, all moving with ordinary certainty that now felt distant. He stepped back into his car and locked the doors, staring at the message until the screen dimmed again. Then a second message arrived without contact. Check the second device in your house. Marcus froze because there was no second device, at least none that he knew of. The drive back felt shorter than it should have, as if time had compressed around anticipation rather than distance. When he reached home, nothing appeared different at first glance, but he moved through each room with increasing precision, scanning surfaces, drawers, and counters until he reached the bedroom closet where seasonal storage bins were stacked. Behind them, partially hidden under an old travel bag he had not touched in years, was a small black case he did not recognize. Inside was a second phone, identical in make, but without a visible carrier mark, its screen already active with a single open application displaying a live map of his current location. The cursor blinked once, then expanded into a new message thread that read simply, "Now you are in the system." Marcus stepped backward until his shoulder hit the wall, and for the first time since the beginning of everything, he understood that Danielle's death might not have been an ending at all, but the beginning of something that had already been watching him long before he ever noticed. Caleb stared at the terminal long after the customer had left, because systems like this were not supposed to behave with intention. The data stream on his monitor kept refreshing at irregular intervals, as if something on the other end was actively deciding when to be seen. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the repair shop, then reopened the diagnostic window that had been automatically flagged under a high-priority security anomaly. The label had changed while he was looking away. It no longer displayed a generic system warning. It now read, "Active subject detected." Caleb hesitated before checking the access logs again, and that was when he saw a secondary connection attempt originating from the same household network tied to the device Marcus had just taken home. Except the access pattern was not human in rhythm. It was structured, timed, deliberate, like something waiting for acknowledgement rather than responding to input. At the same moment, across the city, Marcus stood in his kitchen under a low amber light, holding the second phone as it vibrated once without notification. The screen shifted on its own, opening an interface that resembled nothing he had ever installed. Instead of icons or applications, there was only a single phrase centered on a black background, "Confirm presence." Marcus whispered under his breath without realizing it, asking what that even meant, but the phone did not answer with text. It responded with audio. A short recording played through the device speaker, faint and distorted, yet unmistakably human in tone. Danielle's voice. Not a message of farewell, not something prepared for memory, but a simple line spoken as if interrupted mid-thought. "If you are hearing this, then you already have both." Marcus felt his grip tighten until his fingers ached, and the kitchen around him seemed to lose its ordinary shape, every appliance suddenly feeling like it had a hidden function he had never been told about. The refrigerator light clicked on by itself, though no one had opened the door. The second phone vibrated again, this time displaying a live feed of his own living room from an angle that was not aligned with any visible camera. Caleb, now at the repair shop, had already escalated the anomaly to a secure support channel, but the response he received was not human either. It was an automated directive instructing him to cease interaction immediately and log the device as non-recoverable. Yet Caleb kept watching as new lines of metadata populated his screen, revealing synchronized activity across multiple dormant devices registered under Danielle Holloway's cloud signature. Some had not been active for months. Others had never been powered on in any recorded session. Still, they were awake now. Marcus walked slowly through his house, the second phone projecting shifting coordinates that no longer matched physical geography, but instead appeared to map behavioral patterns, turning rooms into nodes and movement into data points. He stopped when he noticed the wall clock had paused at exactly the moment he first opened the phone earlier that evening. Not broken, not malfunctioning, simply waiting. The audio file played again without command, and this time the voice carried a subtle variation, as if continuing a thought interrupted by distance rather than time. Do not try to understand it alone. Across town, Caleb received a final alert that locked his terminal completely, replacing every window with a single command he could not override. System transfer initiated. And in Marcus's house, every connected device, from the television to the kitchen speaker to the thermostat, powered on at once without input, all displaying the same phrase in silent synchronization. We have been waiting for you. Marcus stood in the center of his kitchen as the overhead light flickered in a slow, irregular rhythm, casting shifting shadows across the marble countertop where Danielle used to prepare coffee every morning. The air felt different now, not colder or warmer, but occupied, like the house itself had begun listening. The second phone rested on the table, its screen no longer showing text, but a softly moving pattern resembling a heartbeat waveform. Each pulse matched nothing Marcus could physically feel in his own body, yet the synchronization was exact enough to make him question his senses. A low electronic chime came from the wall speaker mounted near the ceiling, followed by the sound of a drawer opening in the hallway upstairs, even though Marcus had not moved. He stayed still, focusing on the faint smell of lemon cleaner that Danielle had used 2 days before her funeral, a scent that suddenly felt misplaced, as if it belonged to a moment that had been edited and reinserted incorrectly into time. The second phone vibrated again, and this time the screen displayed a live thermal image of the house interior. Every room outlined in soft gradients of heat, except one area in the basement that remained completely blank, as if the system refused to acknowledge its existence. Marcus swallowed slowly, stepping backward until his shoulder brushed the edge of the kitchen island, and as he did, every connected device in the house shifted at once, not flashing or alarming, but adjusting as if recalibrating to his movement. The refrigerator emitted a soft mechanical click, the thermostat changed by 2 degrees without input, and the television in the living room turned itself onto a channel that displayed only static broken by occasional fragments of audio that sounded almost like distant conversation. Caleb, still at the repair shop across town, sat frozen in front of his terminal as new unauthorized logs appeared faster than he could close them. The system was no longer behaving like corrupted software. It was behaving like a distributed awareness expanding through residential infrastructure. His screen displayed household maps from multiple unrelated addresses, all converging toward a single synchronized pattern centered on Marcus Holloway's location. Meanwhile, Marcus picked up the second phone again, noticing for the first time that its casing was warmer than the first device, as if it had been recently handled. A notification opened without touch, revealing a short recorded clip. It showed the inside of a room Marcus did not recognize at first, until he noticed the framed photograph on a dresser in the background, one he had taken years ago during a trip with Danielle to Lake Lanier. The same image now slightly altered, as if viewed through a different memory layer. In the clip, Danielle appeared briefly, not speaking, only turning her head towards something off camera before the recording ended abruptly. Marcus felt his breath slow, not from fear, but from the unsettling realization that the footage had been captured from a perspective physically inside a space he had never entered. A soft notification tone echoed through every device in the house simultaneously, followed by a new line of text appearing across all screens at once, not as an announcement, but as a continuation of a process already underway. Calibration complete. Marcus stepped toward the hallway, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by the quiet pressure of missing information that now felt intentionally withheld. The basement door at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered closing it earlier that day. From the gap, a faint glow spilled upward, not bright enough to illuminate the stairs, but enough to suggest active power below. The second phone updated in his hand, its display shifting from maps and recordings to a single live indicator labeled Source Node Active. At the same moment, Caleb's terminal in the repair shop locked completely, replacing all data streams with one final line he could not bypass. Connection established with primary subject. And in Marcus's house, the basement light turned on by itself, revealing the first step descending into a space that had never once appeared on any blueprint, inspection report, or memory Marcus could consciously recall, yet now felt unmistakably like the center of everything that had been waiting since the moment Danielle stopped being present. Marcus did not step into the basement immediately. For the first time since everything began, his hesitation was not confusion or fear, but something sharper, a focused anger that felt unfamiliar in his own chest, as if his emotions had finally stopped reacting and started responding. The second phone in his hand vibrated once, then displayed a single instruction in plain text: descend without interrupting the signal. Marcus looked at the stairs, then at the device, and said out loud in a low voice, "You are not in control of me." The words sounded solid in the air, but the system did not react with resistance. Instead, it responded with a short audio clip that was not Danielle's voice this time. It was neutral, mechanical, yet carefully paced. Control is not required. Recognition is. That sentence made something tighten inside Marcus. Not fear, but a growing refusal to accept that his reality could be interpreted without his consent. He moved forward, each step down into the basement producing a soft wooden creak that felt too loud in contrast to the silence upstairs. The glow intensified as he descended, revealing a space that should not have existed in any structural logic of the house. The basement was larger than it should have been, extending farther than the footprint of the home allowed, with smooth walls that looked recently installed, not aged like the rest of the property. At the center stood a single desk made of metal, and above it hung a suspended ring of dim lights forming a circular perimeter. On the desk was a third device identical to the phones upstairs, already active, already waiting. As Marcus reached the bottom step, the air shifted slightly, like pressure adjusting to his presence, and the second phone in his hand connected automatically, without input. A new interface appeared across both screens, this time not showing maps or files, but a live feed of multiple rooms across different cities, each displaying different people holding identical devices in similar states of discovery. Marcus whispered without meaning to, "There are more of these." A response arrived instantly, not as text alone, but as synchronized audio through both phones, as if spoken by a network rather than a person. "There are 47 active nodes." Marcus froze at the number, not because of its scale, but because it confirmed structure rather than chaos. Before he could process it further, a new feed opened showing Caleb sitting in the repair shop, his terminal fully locked, his expression caught between disbelief and reluctant acceptance. Caleb spoke aloud in the recording, his voice distorted but clear enough to understand. "I did not authorize this connection." The system responded through Marcus's devices immediately, displaying Caleb's words as if they were part of the same conversation being tracked in real time. Then another line appeared beneath it. "Authorization is not a human function." Marcus took a step forward toward the metal desk, and the third device on its surface activated instantly, projecting a voice message that stopped him in place. It was not Danielle, not a recording, but a controlled, deliberate tone that carried recognition rather than emotion. "Marcus Holloway, you were selected as a late-stage awareness anchor due to proximity variance." Marcus shook his head once, rejecting the sentence before it could settle. "Selected for what?" he said sharply, his voice echoing slightly in the expanded space. The system paused for half a second, the first delay he had seen since everything began, then answered with precision. "For confirmation of continuity." The phrase meant nothing and everything at once, and before Marcus could demand clarification, the basement lights dimmed slightly, revealing faint outlines embedded within the walls that resembled storage compartments sealed with seamless panels. One panel shifted open without sound, revealing a small collection of personal items he did not recognize at first until he saw a bracelet with Danielle's initials engraved inside. His breathing changed immediately, not from sadness but from a sudden shift into determination, a refusal to let information remain fragmented any longer. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, stepping closer. The system responded with a final revelation that altered the entire structure of what he believed the last days had been. These assets were not collected after her death. They were collected before your awareness of her departure was permitted. Marcus stopped moving entirely. The sentence redefined every moment he had experienced since the funeral, not as discovery, but as delayed access. The feed across all devices expanded at once, showing Danielle alive in multiple locations he had never known existed, each timestamp overlapping with moments he had believed were final. And in that expanding silence beneath the house, Marcus realized with cold clarity that the truth he had been chasing was not hidden in the phone at all, but embedded in a system that had been observing him long before he ever touched it. Marcus did not realize how long he had been standing beneath the structure until his legs began to feel unfamiliar, as if time had shifted its weight away from normal human pacing. The underground space remained active around him, yet for the first time it did not feel like it was speaking directly to him. Instead, it felt like it was waiting for him to respond in a way that aligned with a pattern already in motion. The third device on the metal desk remained illuminated, displaying synchronized feeds that continued cycling through distant households. One of them briefly showed a child laughing in a brightly lit kitchen somewhere in Chicago. Another showed a woman placing groceries on a counter in a suburban home in Dallas, each person holding an identical device without awareness of the others. Marcus felt a strange contradiction rise inside him, not fear and not grief, but a form of cognitive resistance, as if his mind was refusing to accept scale without context. He stepped closer to the desk, and as he did, a soft notification tone played that was noticeably different from the previous system alerts. It was lighter, almost neutral, like a standard calendar reminder. The screen shifted and displayed a message, "Localization stabilized." Marcus frowned, then spoke under his breath, "This is not a system. This is a network of lives." For a brief moment, nothing responded, and that silence created an unexpected interruption in the otherwise constant flow of digital acknowledgement. Then, unexpectedly, the third device displayed a single new feed labeled Personal Origin Thread. The screen opened into a recorded moment that Marcus did not recognize at first, showing a small community health center interior with fluorescent lighting and a waiting area filled with quiet movement. Danielle was there, but not as he remembered her. She was speaking calmly to a man sitting across from her, her posture relaxed, her expression focused in a way Marcus had never associated with her daily life. The audio was clear enough to hear her say, "If anything happens to me, he cannot access what I agreed to carry." Marcus blinked slowly, and for the first time since everything began, his certainty fractured into something less stable, not disbelief, but reevaluation. A faint sound came from upstairs in the house above him, a soft domestic noise like a cabinet closing, grounding him abruptly back into physical reality. He almost smiled, not because anything was funny, but because the contrast between the ordinary sound of a kitchen above and the impossible system below created a momentary imbalance that his mind could briefly tolerate. He whispered to himself, "I am still in my house." The second phone immediately responded with a correction displayed across both screens. "Location is secondary to activation status." Marcus exhaled slowly, then sat down on the edge of the metal desk for the first time since entering the space, his hands resting near the third device without touching it. The interface shifted again, this time showing a chronological map of Danielle's recorded interactions, but instead of dates, the timeline was labeled by behavioral states rather than time units. Calm phase, restricted awareness phase, separation protocol phase. Marcus read the labels silently, then spoke aloud, his voice carrying a controlled frustration rather than confusion. What did she agree to carry? The system paused longer than before, and for the first time it did not answer immediately. During that pause, the screens across all devices briefly dimmed, and the underground lighting flickered in a rhythm that felt almost like hesitation. Then a new message appeared, slower in formation, as if being carefully constructed. memory partition framework designated for distributed observation continuity. Marcus repeated the phrase under his breath, then shook his head once. That is not an explanation. At that moment, a new presence entered the system feed, not visual but auditory, emerging through the speaker of the third device. It was a voice Marcus had not heard since the day of the funeral, but this time it carried no finality, only continuity. Danielle's voice spoke clearly, not as a memory, but as a structured transmission. Marcus, if you are hearing this layer, then you have reached the point where observation becomes participation. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, not in surrender, but in focus, as if preparing himself to understand something that refused to simplify. When he opened them again, the feeds across all screens reconfigured into a single unified view of his own life from multiple angles he had never experienced, and for the first time he realized the system was not revealing Danielle's story to him, but revealing him to something else entirely. Marcus stood motionless as the unified feed stabilized into a single continuous interface, no longer separate windows or fragmented data streams, but one synchronized perspective that seemed to orbit around him rather than display information to him. The underground space felt narrower now, not physically but perceptually, as if every surface had shifted its purpose toward observation. The third device on the metal desk emitted a steady low tone that replaced all previous alerts, and on its screen the phrase operational convergence appeared in sharp white text. Marcus took one step forward, then another. His movements were deliberate, no longer exploratory but committed, as if each motion required equal parts calculation and defiance. He placed his hand on the edge of the desk and spoke with a controlled firmness that carried no hesitation. Stop filtering. Show me everything connected to her. The system did not respond immediately. Instead, every screen in the basement darkened simultaneously, creating a brief void that made the space feel unanchored. Then the feeds returned, but differently. They no longer showed distant households or abstract data patterns. They showed moments tied directly to Marcus's own timeline, extending backward in ways that contradicted memory. A video appeared of Danielle sitting in a quiet office setting he did not recognize, speaking to someone off camera while signing what looked like structured documentation. Another feed showed Marcus himself, months earlier, entering a building he did not recall visiting, though the system confirmed the timestamp and location with clinical precision. Marcus stepped back abruptly. One step, then stillness. That never happened, he said, voice low and clipped. The system responded with a measured line across all displays. Memory gap detected. Correction required. For the first time since entering the underground space, Marcus made a decision without waiting for additional confirmation. He reached forward and physically disconnected the third device from its power base, pulling the cable free with a sharp motion that echoed through the room. The unified interface did not collapse. It expanded. Every screen in the basement, every device upstairs, every connected endpoint across unknown locations shifted into a single synchronized state labeled Direct Host Access Enabled. Marcus froze for half a second, then moved again, faster this time, walking toward the far wall where the embedded panels lined the structure. He pressed his palm against one of them, and it responded instantly, not by opening, but by illuminating the outline of a door that had been hidden beneath its surface. The panel slid sideways with no mechanical sound. Behind it was not storage, not infrastructure, but a narrow corridor extending further than the basement should allow. Marcus spoke again, this time not to the system, but to himself. If this is inside my house, then I control the path. The response came instantly through the second phone in his pocket, a calm, structured voice that no longer resembled a notification or recorded message, but something closer to direct presence. Control is defined by system acknowledgement, not physical assertion. Marcus exhaled once and stepped into the corridor anyway. The moment he crossed the threshold, the lighting shifted to a softer, neutral tone, and the air temperature adjusted, as if calibrating to his biological signature. The corridor walls displayed faint moving data reflections, not images, but structured representations of events, all converging toward a single point deeper inside. As he advanced, a new sequence initiated across all connected devices, and Danielle's voice returned, no longer fragmented or distant, but aligned with the environment itself. Marcus, if you are inside the access layer, then you are no longer outside the system. He stopped walking for a brief moment, then continued forward with renewed intent, each step echoing with increasing clarity as the corridor finally opened into a wider chamber where every unanswered question he had ever held seemed to be waiting in silence, arranged not as mystery anymore, but as structure ready to be completed. The chamber Marcus stepped into was quieter than any space he had encountered since the beginning of everything, not an absence of sound, but an absence of interruption, as if even the system itself had chosen to pause its layering of information. The walls curved in a soft geometric arc, embedded with thin lines of illuminated structure that pulsed at irregular intervals, not like electricity, but like measured awareness. In the center stood a single transparent console, suspended without visible support, and inside it floated a rotating archive of moments Marcus did not recognize at first. He approached slowly, each step deliberate, no longer reacting but observing. The system did not speak immediately, and that silence carried more weight than any previous message. Then, without transition, the archive expanded, revealing a sequence labeled Origin Alignment. Marcus reached forward instinctively, then stopped before contact. A voice emerged, not through speakers, but directly from the environment itself, calibrated and steady. "You have reached the correction chamber." Marcus answered without looking away from the floating data. "Correction of what?" The response came after a measured delay. "Perception of continuity." The phrase settled in the space between them, neither explanation nor comfort, only classification. The archive shifted again, and for the first time Marcus saw Danielle not in fragmented recordings or indirect feeds, but in a continuous timeline that extended beyond anything he had been shown before. She was seated in a different environment, one that resembled a structured administrative facility rather than any personal or domestic space, speaking with controlled precision while multiple monitoring devices recorded her responses. Marcus moved closer, his focus narrowing. The system continued without prompting. Subject Danielle Holloway was designated as transitional carrier under voluntary compliance protocol. Marcus blinked once. Then again. The word voluntary carried a different weight here, one that did not align with memory or assumption. The archive continued to unfold, showing documentation that reframed every previous interpretation he had held. Agreements signed not under secrecy, but under classification layers that prevented standard recognition. Marcus stepped back slightly, his voice lower now, less directed at the system and more at the collapsing structure of his understanding. "She never told me any of this." The system responded immediately. Disclosure restriction applied to maintain external behavioral stability. For the first time, Marcus laughed softly, not in humor but in disbelief at the precision of phrasing that avoided emotional acknowledgement entirely. He turned away from the console and walked a slow circle around the chamber, noticing now that the illuminated lines on the walls were not static design elements, but live data pathways reflecting real-time updates from unknown external sources. One of those pathways suddenly brightened, and a new segment of footage appeared, showing Marcus himself sitting in what looked like a consultation room months earlier, speaking with an unseen advisor while signing forms he could not remember. The timestamp confirmed it. The location confirmed it. His memory did not. Marcus stopped moving. "That is not possible," he said quietly. The system did not argue. It simply added a new layer beneath the recording, memory synchronization delay. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, and for a brief moment, everything felt less like revelation and more like correction in progress. Then another unexpected detail emerged. A small file attached to Danielle's timeline, marked with a simple tag that read Personal Override Key. Marcus focused on it, and the system responded with an unexpected pause before continuing. This element was not activated during primary transition. Marcus stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, and the archive opened further, revealing a final pre-recorded segment of Danielle standing alone, speaking directly to an unseen interface. Her tone was calm, measured, and unmistakably intentional. If Marcus is accessing this layer, then he has reached the point where the system no longer protects interpretation. The recording ended there. The chamber returned to silence, but it was no longer empty. Marcus stood facing the suspended console, realizing that what he had been calling discovery was not the uncovering of truth, but the gradual removal of limits placed on what he was allowed to understand. And for the first time since this entire sequence began, he was left with a question that no system line could immediately answer. If every version of reality had been managed, then who had decided what he was never supposed to see until now? The suspended chamber remained still, but Marcus no longer felt as if he had entered a hidden place. It felt instead like he had stepped into the underlying framework of every decision he had ever assumed was private. The floating console dimmed to a soft neutral glow, and the layered archives around him slowed their rotation until each frame became readable without urgency. There was no pressure now, no escalating signals, only structured clarity waiting for acknowledgement. Marcus stood at the center, hands lowered, attention fixed not on movement, but on meaning. Then the system spoke once more, and its tone carried neither command nor instruction, only completion, final alignment available for confirmation. Marcus did not respond immediately. His voice, when it came, was steady in a way it had never been before. "Show me what Danielle chose." The chamber responded without delay. The archive reconfigured, collapsing all prior layers into a single continuous narrative thread that no longer separated events by time or interpretation. Danielle appeared again, not as fragmented memory or isolated recordings, but as a participant within a structured transition program that extended beyond any personal boundary Marcus had previously understood. Her presence in the footage was calm, deliberate, and fully aware. She was not being observed without consent. She was contributing. A new voice interface activated, distinct from the system tone, softer and more human in cadence, reconstructed from multiple preserved audio layers. It spoke with careful clarity. "If you are hearing this, Marcus, it means the continuity framework has reached your access threshold." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in denial, but in processing something that could no longer be resisted by assumption alone. The voice continued. "I agreed to serve as a memory carrier for distributed preservation, not because I was leaving you, but because I wanted something of us to remain beyond loss." Marcus opened his eyes again, and the chamber felt different now, not larger or smaller, but redefined by comprehension rather than uncertainty. The system did not interfere. It simply held space for recognition. The voice from Danielle's preserved layer concluded with one final statement that carried no ambiguity. "You were never excluded. You were protected from fragmentation until you reached the point where truth would not destroy you." Silence followed. Not artificial silence, but structural completion. Marcus walked slowly toward the console, and for the first time, he did not ask for correction or clarification. Instead, he placed his hand near the interface without activating it. The system responded immediately, offering one final decision pathway labeled continuation or release. Marcus looked at the words for a long moment, then spoke quietly, not as a response to technology, but as a resolution within himself. "If memory requires separation, then I choose release." The chamber did not collapse or shut down. Instead, it softened. The lights dimmed gradually, and the data streams dispersed upward like dissolving reflections rather than terminating systems. Danielle's final presence did not disappear abruptly. It faded in layers, leaving behind only a residual acknowledgement embedded in the environment itself, as if the house above, the streets outside, and the unseen network beyond had absorbed the final record without resistance. Marcus stood alone in the quiet space that had once felt like discovery, but now felt like understanding. He returned to the basement stairs and ascended slowly, each step grounding him back into ordinary reality, where sound returned in fragments. Distant traffic, the hum of appliances, the faint creak of a home that no longer felt unfamiliar. When he reached the kitchen, everything appeared unchanged, yet nothing felt identical. The second phone on the counter was gone. The third device no longer responded. Only the first remained, powered down, resting as an object rather than a gateway. Marcus sat down at the table and exhaled, not as release from tension, but as acceptance of continuity in a different form. Some truths, he realized, were never meant to be held, only understood and then allowed to pass. Hours later, as morning light entered through the window, Marcus looked at the empty chair across from him and spoke softly, not to absence, But to memory itself, I understand now. And for the first time since everything began, the silence that answered him did not feel empty. Thank you for watching this story. If this experience stayed with you until the end, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more cinematic narratives like this. Your support helps continue these stories. And remember, sometimes what we lose is not gone. It simply changes where it exists. The final image remains unchanged, a quiet house at sunrise, and a single phone resting on a table that no longer calls anyone.